Capper, Spike, A True Love by Switchdown. Not long ago, after that Storm King was defeated, Capper, he had no otherwise to stay anywhere. The other town where he used to live was in the desert town, and he thought maybe he's going to go back there. But since then he had made so many friends in Ponyville. But then, before he was going to go move back there, Twilight had offered him and asked him if he wanted to stay in Ponyville among his friends. At first, he didn't actually feel home there, but he said that he would give it a try. And much of it as a try, he first decided to give it at least a month as a try. And he didn't expect that this time going to be that longer. At first, he had it very hard to get any particular job in Ponyville since most of the work there was based on ponies. But help from Capper and from his new friends, he actually managed to help his friends from time to time at either at Rarity's boutique and helping at Sweet Apple Acres and or with Fluttershy's animals. And then, one day, Miss Jill Lee had actually asked Capper if he could tell something about his origin, like where he's from, where he was born, and something about his culture. And Capper, he actually didn't want to first tell much about his personal story, but he actually thought sharing his culture to other creatures. Since he saw that Twilight and her friends had opened school, and that most of the students were ponies, but there were a few were actually Dragon, Griffin, Jack, and Hippogriff. So why not to share his culture to any different other culture? So he became like an assistant in Miss Shirley's class when he's sharing his personally of his time and his home before that he had to escape after that Storm King invasion of his home. Most of his time, his stories about this, the students listen carefully. And they often ask, what would he do if he hasn't left when the invasion still happened? Capper had probably said that he would be captured by the forces of Storm King and used as slaves for his own gain. But after he escaped, he lived in this desert town for a number of years before he moved to Ponyville after he helped defeat Storm King. But living in Ponyville actually helped him a lot. He had actually moved on from his old past of as a conned cat or a thief. Since he had got a lot of many friends, plenty of new friends, and very much his own place, a small apartment in town, and earning a lot of money for his work. And he even became like almost a teacher in Twilight School, teaching about his culture to all other ponies there or other students. At first, Rainbow Dash was a little skeptical that he wouldn't fit as a teacher, since he used to be a former thief, and much of that. But he proved her wrong. He was actually very good at teaching. And it turns out that Capper actually had a lot of things. He was good in math. Even he didn't go in school not that much. But he was good in math, good in writing, and also teaching others about how to use his skills for good purpose. At first, when he introduced this idea to Twilight and her friends, they thought that he was teaching their students how to be a con or a thief, a criminal. But he promised only to put that skills in for good purpose. So then he asked how, for example. Then he saw that this opportunity, how to open a locked door. If you don't have magic, if there if you had to use anything that could open a door without any magic. So he used his skills to open a door, and he managed to do that without leaving a much a mark. And his friends was impressed of his skill, but he also said they could use this, but only in emergency if they didn't have any friends of magic around. But was just one other piece of the staff at school he was close to, but it was actually Spike. Of all other creatures there, Spike was probably the only one he could feel related most to. Since Spike was probably the second only dragon, except for Smolder, who's a student, but Spike was an assistant. Spike and Capper often sometimes spent time at the school during lunch breaks, recess, and even after school, where they just talked, played games, or even it happens that Spike invited Capper to this guy night between him, Big Mac, and Discord. At first, Capper was very much not as impressed of this type of role-playing games night, but after time, he got used to it. But what is one thing the most that Capper actually didn't feel at most. Every time when he was walking around town, on the streets, on the market, or just in the park, he always saw that most of his friends there had their special stone pony. Seeing them hugging, kissing, just walking along together, it made him feeling distant, alone, unloved. That was one of the few reasons that he felt maybe he didn't belong in that particular community or the society, mostly based with the ponies. There were only a few other creatures there, but they were only students. But he could feel more connected to them, but he wanted to have some pony of his own kind. But to travel back home, it would take days, maybe as a week or two, to get there. But it's probably no one of his kind wouldn't be with him after he found out he used to be a thief. So he hasn't been home since he left during the invasion. But for most time of his spare time, he actually spent time with Spike, or rather with Discord. But it happens that Spike had noticed that Capper felt alone, distant. For most, he wonders how he could cheer him up, and even told Twilight and her friends about this, and they were not much surprised because most of their friends had noticed it themselves. Spike had been asked by Twilight and the others if he could spend some time with Capper, perhaps maybe just take him to the movies sometimes, maybe just hang out with him. So Spike had actually asked Capper if they could just hang out, go to the movies or go to the bowling alley, just have some fun. And for the most part, it was actually not as surprising. But it turns out, over time, Spike had actually started getting feelings for Capper, even though he was a young adult cat and he was a baby dragon. Spike didn't know if this was just some random feelings or if it's going to be just something else. But Spike had no idea how to tell him. But at the same time, Spike has still strong feelings for Rarity. But this time, he actually told Rarity how he felt for her. And it turns out Rarity didn't like Spike design the same way back. Rarity was already dating Soren from the Wonderbolts. Spike at first took it very hard and was very depressed for days after he'd been told and after that. But after a time, he gets started investing some time with Capper and other friends just to cheer him out. But now Spike seems to be falling in love with Capper, but Capper didn't know that. And to be honest from himself, Capper had no idea if he would ever fall in love with another creature like a pony. He actually started dating Fluttershy, and when Spike found out, he was crushed. He was going to tell Capper how it felt for her and for him, but at the same time he found out he was already dating Fluttershy. But this dating didn't last that long, because Fluttershy felt that they should stay as friends and not be dating. Capper he agreed, because even though he liked her very much, but they both decided just to be friends, and they did. But that didn't last that long for Capper. After that, he decided to dating somebody else, and he actually fell for Applejack. After he'd been dating Fluttershy for a couple of weeks, he decided dating Applejack. That actually lasted a bit longer, for about almost 2 months. But then Capper was told by Applejack that she had actually been falling in love with someone on the pony. So Capper took it very hard, but he accepted. It took him maybe less than a week or two to come over Applejack. But then, one day when Capper and Spike were just hanging out in the park, just talking, he actually asked Spike how it was going between him and Rarity, because he's been told that he liked her so very much. Spike told Capper the truth. She was already dating somebody else, and that was very much hard. And then he asked Capper if he had been dating somebody else. He said that he had been dating Fluttershy, but they remained just decided to be friends, and that he dated Applejack for some time, but he had found somebody else, so they just remained friends. So Spike then asked just randomly if Capper would ever consider to date like him. And he said that as mostly like a joke and started laughing a little bit. Capper just didn't look at Spike as much and just looked straight forward, and said, well, I should say, yeah, I would date a dragon like you, since you're a very good friend of mine, so why not? Spike didn't expect that kind of answer. It took him off guard. But Spike then said that he wanted to tell Capper something. And he told Capper exact same thing. And that took him very much by surprise. So Spike then just asked if he would go out with him the next day, and he said yes. And sure enough, within that the same day after, they actually went to the movies, saw this comedy, and after they had a dinner at the castle. Twilight had been told by Spike only a few days later about this date and that they are now seen together. She was just happy for Spike that he had moved on from Rarity, and just hoped that this relationship was going to work, even though that he was still young and that Kappa was much older than Spike, but they decided to just try at least. And over this few months after, Spike and Kappa had still remained strong together as a couple. At first they kept this most only as a secret, but only their closest friends knows about it. But some time after, all ponies in town know about it. Soon, it had spread across Equestria. Everywhere they went, they were not judged by any ponies. There were also ponies that thought maybe that was a bit strange, that a cat with a dragon. They didn't say that was a bad thing because they had actually thought they thought it was just a little bit strange. Nothing else was a bad thing. They didn't expect a cat with a dragon. Although they have been seen some with a dragon with a pony or a pony with a griffin. So why wouldn't they celebrate them being together? So for the past few months after this has been revealed to the public, Spike and Capper decided to take a little bit easy for a while. They didn't break up or they still went on dates just to relax a bit more, to just slow it, not to rush into much serious things in the relationship. Spike remained Twilight's #1 assistant both at school and after that. Capper had actually remained as a part-time teacher at the school, and even sometimes to help his friends either at Rarity's Boutique, Fluttershy, or at Sweet Elbow Acres. But over time, Capper had decided he wanted to go back home for a visit. So he actually decided to take Spike with him. And they all took an airship all the way back home. And surprised enough, after he came back, he was surprised to see his home was actually had been rebuilt, and the peace was back, and the king and the queen had been restored to peace again after that Tempest has been there only a few years earlier, and telling about this that Storm King was gone. Capper and Spike stayed at his home for about a week. At first, many of the cast there was skeptical and didn't understand how Capper could be with a dragon. But they wasn't actually afraid of Spike. They have been seeing dragons many times before, and that in Sky, Spike had actually been very friendly to most of the cast there. He told them a lot about his home, and he was actually introduced to the king and queen, and made him like an ambassador for Capper's home between Equestria. And after they came back home, Capper had told his friends, and even Spike told them what happened, and they were just very surprised to hearing how well their visit went. But then, 10 years later, Spike was now a grown adult, and he was now ready for the next step in their relationship. He wanted to take the next step by asking Capper to marry him. At first, Spike was very skeptical that he would say no, because even they have been together for about 10 years. But when he asked him, Capper didn't say no at all. He said yes, and this is going to be one of the biggest weddings of the year, and especially in Ponyville. Unfortunately for Capper, most of his friends who lived in his homeland had passed, or moved elsewhere, or so they couldn't touch them. So, but after this wedding, Spike and Capper actually celebrating 2 weeks in Crystal Empire for their honeymoon. But sometime after this honeymoon, they won't have their own family. So Capper and Spike actually adopted 2 daughters from a local orphanage in Ponyville, and 2 years later they adopted a son. And that's how Capper, Spike, and the true love, they got a family. The end.